Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this GIRI forum. Today we're addressing the relationship between error avoidance and climate change. A stretch, you might think, but Nick Francis has the answers and he'll be talking about that later. On the housekeeping front, can I ask you to mute your microphones if not speaking, but please remember to turn them back on when you're in the breakout rooms. If you don't mind, please leave on your video, because that way we feel the meeting has a bit more vitality. One of the things I find with these virtual meetings is that it's very difficult to gauge audience reaction. So the more we can see you, the better. Any questions as we go through, please use the chat box and Nick or I will try and pick those up towards the end of the meeting if we have time. And if you have tech problems, well, the usual tech advice, turn off and try again. Leave the meeting and rejoin using the same link. It's been a tough time, hasn't it, in the industry over the last year? Tough for everyone, really. Firms have been forced to reassess overheads and budgets, and as a result, longer term industry improvements and training comes under the microscope. GIRI is committed to the industry and raising its game through the avoidance of error and the benefits that brings. There are the productivity improvements, which we've talked about before, and they're a direct benefit. But let's also recognise the positive impact on quality, safety and sustainability. Many of you would be familiar with GIRI to a greater or lesser extent, but I think it's worth just reflecting on some key points about the origins of our thinking. The original strategy for change research was carried out with the objective of generating a significant change in the efficiency of the UK construction industry through reducing the amount of errors we make. GIRI carried out a further research project in 2016 into the impact of error in the industry, and that research was funded by industry and the CITB. The results showed how much waste was caused by error. 21% of turnover. And of this 21%, it was broken down effectively into 4 areas. The direct cost of error, which came in at 5%. This is just the basic cost of an error and putting it right. Then indirect costs of error, 7%. This is the resources that are used in follow-up work and the impact it has on other parties directly involved with the error. The unrecorded process waste is 6%. These are errors which occur, are corrected, but never really recorded, so you don't get a handle on them. And latent defects, these are 3%. Latent defects are those errors which occur and are spotted after the defects liability period, when the building or infrastructure is already in use. Now, these figures may be a bit higher or a bit lower, but they're certainly the right order of magnitude. And the GDP of the construction industry is circa 100 billion, 110 billion pounds. So if 21%, 21 billion pounds is being wasted per annum. And thinking about an average construction company, if they're making 2 or 3% in this climate, they're doing really well. So it's really a no-brainer that we should be doing something about this massive waste. The research showed that there are top 10 root causes of error, and our activities following the result of this research have been targeted on these highest ranking causes. For example, design features frequently in the list. So we produced a guide to increase value by avoiding error in design, specifically to address this. The guide is available to download from our website, along with a number of other research reports. Originally, we secured funding to carry out the research project. The report showed how much could be gained by a structured approach to improving error reduction. So we set up GIRI Limited with these 5 key aims. GIRI was created as a not-for-profit company, paid for by subscription. So our first aim, create a culture and working environment to get it right from the start, the culture question. Change attitudes and harness leadership responsibility to reduce error and improve quality and productivity. Engage all stakeholders in eliminating error from inception through operation to completion. So everybody in the industry and those we impact on. Share knowledge about our error reduction processes and systems. We often find that we keep the information we have to ourselves about our errors. We need to share. This helps. Improve skills across the sector, creating a positive approach to preempting error. Our business is about preempting error, not about putting it right after the event, and our training deals with this specifically. The GIRI board met in November last year and collectively felt it's time to update our messaging to bring it into focus with a broader range of the areas where reducing error has a positive impact and where action on culture and behaviours can reduce error. Alongside the clear productivity gains, we save time and money. We also recognise the benefit to safety, and there was an Australian study that found 37% of accidents that were occurring during rework. And of course, carbon footprint in the waste of resources, both material and physical, is avoided if we don't have to do the same job more than once. We believe in avoiding errors throughout the project cycle. This includes after handover. We need to ask ourselves whether it is an error to design and construct buildings and infrastructure that have a greater negative effect on our environment than is necessary or reasonable. We need to have the right culture throughout the industry so that people feel empowered to act in ways which reduce error to the benefit of those in the industry and those who live and work in the buildings and infrastructure we create. We need to change the way we work and behave now. If we do that, we will have an industry that is more cost effective and has a better reputation. Now let's hear from Nick. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Cliff. Well, it's nice to see some familiar faces and some familiar names as well. If you're able to give me a wave, that would be great. It's really nice just to know that there are other human beings out there that I'm actually talking to. That's always a bonus. Okay, so the topic for today is looking at the climate crisis and the so what for GIRI. Now, if you're anything like me, you probably find this subject quite overwhelming. And let me see if I can share my screen. Here we go. So this is just a snapshot of what has come through my door in the last few weeks. So pretty much every industry journal or document I subscribe to, it's on the front cover of everything. It really is a big issue for us. So what we're going to try and do today is to try and make sense of this, because it can be very overwhelming, and it's clearly absolutely vital that we get our heads around it. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and answer 4 relatively straightforward questions. So we're going to start off with what is climate change, just some very basics, just to give us a level playing field. We're then going to ask, what has it got to do with construction? So, i.e., why are we bothering with it? And then we're going to say, well, why is responding to climate change so hard? It seems to be that this is hard work sorting this problem out. So why is it hard? And then the final question is, therefore, what should GIRI do? We are an industry body, therefore, what does it mean for us? So those are the 4 things we're going to look at. Now, I'm going to start off with a poll. Now, this is pushing the limits of my technical ability, but let's see if this is all loaded up. Yeah, okay. So I'm going to give a poll in a moment. Now, this poll is asking, so each year, human beings use 158,000 billion kilowatt hours of energy. So the kilowatt hour is what whizzes round on your meter. And as human beings, we use 158,000 billion of those each year. Now, what I want to know is how long does it take that much energy from the sun to hit the Earth? So is that the amount of energy that hits the Earth in a second, in a minute, in an hour, a day, a week, a month, a year, 10 years, or 100 years? So I'll put the poll up, if I can press the right button. There we go. Your shared video. Oh, I don't know what that means. Is that poll visible on your screens now? Great. So I'll give you 30 seconds or so to try and answer that question, please. Okay, if we got a few answers, so the last few of you, if you can click on those. Okay, I'll give you 10 more seconds to answer that question. Let's see. Okay, poll is ended. Great. Let me stick that answers over there, and I will try and share those answers now. So let's have a look at what answers you've given. Here we go. So the answers we had were: someone thought a second, a few people thought a minute, a few people thought an hour, someone thought a year, and a few of you weren't quite sure. So the actual answer is 1 hour. So the total amount of energy that human beings use each year is roughly the same as the amount of energy that hits the Earth from the sun every hour. So that sort of tells us something in a way. That is telling us that we are not adding a huge amount of energy to the Earth compared to the energy that's hitting the Earth anyway. There's a lot of energy that hits the Earth, and we're adding a little bit. But what we also know is that the world is getting hotter. So let's have a look at a little bit of information on that. Here we go. So we know that the years 2014 to 2018 were the 5 hottest years on record. So that's since about 1880. So certainly in recent history, the Earth is getting much, much hotter pretty quickly. And it's not just getting hotter. We know that we're having quite extreme temperatures and extreme weather. So these are from 2018, February 2018, we had the beast from the east. February 2019, it was the warmest February ever. So we know that there's a lot happening with our weather. But let's have a look at that on a more global scale. So for the older members of the audience, you might remember the summer of 1976. Cliff's nodding. It was your 40th birthday that year, was it, Cliff? So what we're looking at here is this was an extremely hot summer in the UK, and you can see that red dot showing the temperature that summer. But let's compare that to 2018. So this was 2018, roughly the same weather in the UK at the same time of year. But look what's happened around the rest of the globe when you compare those two. So what we can tell from that is that 1976 was weather because it was a localized thing. But actually, by 2018, we had the same high temperatures, a little bit due to weather, but actually the global temperature has changed significantly. And if we look on a longer time scale, so this is a graph going back to about 10,000 years ago, we can see that the average temperature changes over time. And this is where we are now. So we're basically about the same temperature-ish as we were 6,000 or 7,000 years ago. But the really interesting thing is this line here and the rate of change of that temperature. So this we can think of as normal temperature fluctuations because the Earth does change. And this is the line of very recent temperature change. So we can see that there is something pretty significant going on. So what I'll do is I'll play a short video that will hopefully explain things a bit better than I can. And this is trying to explain why carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions are related to this issue of temperature. So let's share that now. Go, share and play. Can you give me a thumbs up?
Earth's atmosphere. Every year, natural processes add approximately 200 gigatons of carbon to it in form of carbon dioxide, methane, and other compounds. This doesn't just accumulate in the atmosphere, however, as approximately 200 gigatons of carbon are removed every year through natural processes such as acid rain. This means that the Earth's atmosphere is broadly in equilibrium, with carbon sources balancing carbon sinks. Or at least it would be if we humans hadn't entered the scene. We currently add about 5% as much carbon to the atmosphere every year as natural processes do. But while some natural processes removing carbon from the atmosphere have slightly increased, such as the oceans absorbing more carbon and becoming slightly more acidic, carbon is building up in the atmosphere because of human emissions. We have disturbed the natural equilibrium. This is a problem as the total amount of carbon in the atmosphere is proportional to the ability of the atmosphere to trap heat. The more carbon there is in the atmosphere, the hotter the planet gets. Since the start of the Industrial Revolution, humans have added a lot of carbon to the atmosphere. Initially, we didn't have very much, as there weren't that many processes like factories or power plants emitting carbon by burning coal. But as the 19th and then 20th centuries rolled on, the amount we added rose significantly. By 2020, we were adding 9 gigatons of carbon to the atmosphere in a single year. Scientists estimate that if we are to avoid the worst effects of climate change, we need to limit the total amount of carbon that we add to the atmosphere to less than 1 trillion tons, or 1,000 gigatons. This is an approximate threshold, and plenty of negative effects will occur before it is reached, but 1 trillion tons is still a useful target to aim for. To date, we have added more than half of this threshold amount already. At current rates of carbon emissions, this threshold will be reached in just 30 years.
Okay, so we've had a look at that link between carbon and here we go, clicking buttons here. So we've had a look at that link between carbon emissions and temperature. So we can see that there's some sort of direct link. So I think the next question we then need to ask is, well, what's that got to do with construction? Because that's obviously the field we're focused on. So I'm going to ask another poll in a minute, but I will share my screen and put up this chart. Here we go. So there is a chart. Now this is showing world carbon dioxide emissions by country. And we can see that obviously China is the most, emitting just somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of all the world's. Sorry, I'm trying to multitask here. So China's emitting between 1/4 and 1/3 of all of the world's emissions now, which isn't surprising because they have by far the most people. USA emits about half as much as that. India about half as much as that. And then we go down through the other countries and we can see the United Kingdom down here. So looks small compared to China, but when you think by population, we're clearly emitting quite a lot still. So what I want you to think about now is if we were to add up all of the emissions from the construction sector worldwide, where would it sit on this chart? So if the construction industry were a country, where would it be on this chart? Would the construction industry be emitting about the same as the United Kingdom? Would it be about the same as Mexico? Would it be about the same as South Korea? Where would it be? So I'm going to share that that poll now and see what you think. There we go. Hopefully that's popped up. If you give me a thumbs up if that's working. Can anyone see a poll? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so let's see what answers you get. Please have a go at answering that poll now. Okay, we've got a few answers coming in. Waiting for a couple more answers. Okay, let's have a look then at those answers. I'll stick that on the screen here. So we've got, there we go. I'll stop this poll, close the poll. There we go. So that should be closed. So we've got a few people saying more than Russia, several people saying more than the EU and the UK, 3 people saying more than the US. Well, the actual answer is that the construction industry sits somewhere here at about 4 billion tons of CO2 a year. So that means it's not quite as much as the US, but it's more than India. And interestingly, cement manufacture alone is still more than India, up there just under 3 billion tons a year from cement manufacture. So in terms of that question of carbon emissions, what do they have to do with construction? Well, actually, the construction industry will be the 3rd biggest country in the entire world in terms of carbon emissions. So clearly we've got quite a lot to do with this. And I just want to show one other slight graph that is an alternate to this graph, which shows per capita emissions. And that's showing that actually the United Kingdom per capita is only just behind China, but we've already built all of our infrastructure. China's catching up. So we certainly can't think, oh, this is just a problem for China. So when we talk about construction and climate change, often there are 2 topics that come up, and we could be thinking about our focus should be reducing impact, so reducing our carbon emissions, or we could be thinking about building resilience, so creating an infrastructure that means we can cope with the impact of climate change. I just wondered, does anyone have any thoughts on where we should be putting our effort? Should we be putting our effort in preventing the damage and reducing climate change? Should we be putting our efforts into building resilience, building, systems that mean we're not going to get flooded, ways that we can live in a hotter world? Where should we be putting our effort? Maybe use the chat box or unmute if you want to add a comment.
Can I just come in quickly on there? One of the problems is with climate is it's a long-term situation, and it's very volatile to political decisions, and politics is short-term. There's an enormous divide in that what is good for the politicians and it is short-termism, so their decisions will be for the span of their authority and empowerment, and they need to actually think with a mindset that actually realizes that they are just custodians, like we all are, custodians of our kids' future world. So it's a bit, I'm just throwing that thought in.
I think that's a really interesting point, David. And the thing that strikes me with that is we could almost have the same conversation saying the word infrastructure instead of climate in a way. I know that we have these conversations about why are we spending lots of money on X. Anyone else want to comment on what David said?
Hi, Nick, it's Gavin.
Hi, Gavin.
It's not really a comment, I suppose, for what David just said, but going back to your original question, personally, I think the primary focus is to reduce impact. However, I think equally we would need to build in some resilience as well. It's not going to, we're not going to change things, as what reference to David said, immediately. So we're going to have to respond to the impact and the climatic changes that we will be having to deal with over the next few years. And so therefore we have no choice but to build in and react to that resilience. However, ultimately we need to reduce the impact.
Okay, interesting. So it sounds like we need to do both. And that's what I think, Barry, you seem to say the same thing there, didn't you? That they're not mutually exclusive. Yeah, it's interesting because I know whenever I see a flood protection scheme, it normally involves vast amount of concrete being poured, and it does always sort of slightly jar that I'm like, well, I'm not sure this is, is this really having the impact we want? But yeah, there's definitely some sort of challenge there, isn't it? But interestingly, what it sounds like is that this isn't technically impossible. So when we're talking about what we should do for climate change, we seem to be able to answer the technical problem quite quickly, going, oh, well, we need to do things that produce less emissions and we need to put in a bit of resilience. But this strikes me as something that I know Harvard Business School talk a lot about, is mistaking technical problems with adaptive challenges. So a technical problem is something like doing heart surgery or designing a microchip. It's complicated, but people can do it. And then you've got adaptive challenges, which is where you have people involved, making decisions, deciding how to work together. And that's where it gets really messy. So it sounds to me like we're more into the adaptive challenge, behavior, decision-making world than we are in the technical, what's the engineering solution world. So we need to be clear that that's what we're trying to deal with. Okay, so we know that's the type of problem we're dealing with. So, all of you who are familiar with GIRI will know that we like to focus on what are the underlying root causes of a problem, understand the underlying root causes, and then we tend to look for things like behaviors and decision making and understand what is it that shapes the way people behave. So we're going to now look at that next question of why is this problem so hard? And the vehicle we're going to use for that is, I'll share my screen again. Now this is a tool sort of developed by psychologists, and it's called the biases. So it looks at the different factors that determine why we behave in particular ways. What are the sort of hidden influences that determine what we do? So I just want to try and have a bit of a dive into some of these, if we can start to understand how our psychology, how our behavior is either helping or hindering our ability to behave appropriately as an industry to the challenge of climate change. Excuse me. So this thing here looks a bit confusing, but it's actually brilliant. It's really fun. You could probably spend an hour just diving around and looking at it. But it's got a list around the outside of big headline factors that determine what we do, what we think, how we behave. And some of it might be because we've got too much information, that'll influence how you behave. If we can't find enough meaning, we can't make sense of stuff, if we need to act quickly, or what we've seen before, what we remember. And then these blobs on the inside show a variety of more detailed explanations for why we behave in particular ways. So in a moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite you all into this big whiteboard space so you can all come in here. And I want you to look at these and basically pick these and just try and answer this question. What influences the way the construction industry responds to the climate crisis? So we're looking at these things, these blobs that we know are psychological factors that shape the way people behave. And we're saying, how are these things going to be influencing our ability as an industry to respond to this challenge? So because that's a bit obscure, what I'll do is I will try and give you a couple of examples. So here we go. So for example, I might look at this one and say, oh, well, we notice things that we're primed in a memory and we repeat often. So basically we notice things we're familiar with. So I might notice that and go, well, do you know what? that sounds to me like, I'll just put this example down. Go, I'll turn it into a bit bigger one. Zoom in. Let's go over there. Go, I'll make that bit bigger. So I might say, well, I once worked on a retrofit project that was poorly planned. Therefore, I always assume that demolition and new build is the better option, because something I've seen before, what I've seen and what is in my memory influences what I think. So that might be how I pick out from that. Let's have a look at another one. We can think of stereotypes. Okay, so let's imagine I've worked on a project and it was held up by climate protesters who were stopping me getting access to site. So let's find stereotypes. We fill in characteristics and stereotypes. So I might say, well, I was held up on a job by environmental protesters. They really annoyed me, and therefore I will automatically tend to take the opposite opinion of anything they say. I've noticed that because these people annoy me, I'm likely to push against them. Shall we have a look at one more? Let's think of something we're familiar with. So if we're familiar with something, where's that? Go. Focused, we drew. Oh, here we go. I think it's down here. Yeah, things we're familiar and fond of. So I might say, for example, that I'm familiar with reinforced concrete construction because it's what I've done for the past 20 years. Therefore, being familiar with it influences the way I behave. Does anyone have any immediate questions about what I'm going to ask you to do in a second? I want you to pick out one of these things that influences behavior, and then see if you can find a way that that thing might relate to why we find it hard for our industry to adapt. Okay, well, what I'll do then is I'll invite you in. Now, this big whiteboard area, for those of you who haven't used it before, is called Mural. And what I'll do is I'll click this share button, click on this link, copy that link. And when I've done that, what I'm going to do is I'll share it in the chat box. And when you come in here, this whole whiteboard, you'll be allowed into it. And there's a little screen down at the bottom. It's like on any bit of CAD software, and it shows you where you are on the screen. And you can click on the screen and drag it around, and you can zoom in and out using that little bar there. So what I'd like you to do is when you come in here, just come over to this box here and write your name on a post-it. Now, the way you do that, you can either just click on the screen and a post-it will pop up. So I'll delete that one. Or you can go over to the left-hand side, see the post-it icon, and then grab a post-it and stick it where you want it. And I'll put my name on there, Nick. So what I'll do now is I will share that that link in the chat box. Go. And if you click on the link in the chat box now, you will turn up on this whiteboard. So I'll just give you a minute to try and do that. And I'll stop sharing my screen so you don't get muddled by looking at the same thing on two screens. So I can, there we go, I can see a few of you popping in. I've got some musical notes, a cello, mouth organ, piano, trumpet. Great. If anyone has any problems, just give me a shout and I'll try and talk you through if you're not able to get in. Go. Elena's winning the race. Brilliant. Thanks, Elena. Okay, so I think we've got, so is there anyone, if anyone's having a problem getting in, just give me a shout. But if not, we'll carry on. Okay, and I can see a few of you are already looking at the this big chart of all of the behaviours and biases. So if you navigate now across to the right, and you'll start to see those biases. So what I'll do is I'll be quiet for a few minutes and let you read those and start sticking some post-its on, and then we'll have a chat about what you've identified and see if anyone agrees about stuff, disagrees, and we'll see what you think. Okay, so I'll give you just under a minute left to type your post-its up. Also, take a moment to look at what other people are writing as well, and then we'll review what people have said. There we go. You should hopefully have all got a nice little ping pong then from the mural board. So that's just telling us that time is up. So let's have a look at what people have put. What I'll do is I will share my screen. Now I can do something quite cunning as well. I can grab you all. Here we go. So summon, boonk. So I've just grabbed all of you. So your screen's just popped to see the whole thing. And what I'll do as well is I'll share my screen. So if you're looking on WebEx, you'll also see what I'm looking at. So let's go around this now and we can all chat. So this not seen anything like X before. That's an interesting one. Who put that? Can you maybe explain what you mean by that one?
Yeah, that was me, Nick. I banked
Yeah.
it. Yeah, just, I think about the idea of kind of reverting to things that we know. So, but isn't one of the important things here potentially that we won't know it because it will be different? And so, yeah, they're not maybe primed in our memory and therefore repeated.
So doing something different is inherently difficult because by definition we haven't seen it before. Yeah, thank you. So we've got it's someone else's problem to deal with. We don't celebrate success enough. Interesting. Okay. We've got climate change is more noticeable than ever. More action being taken against it. CC comms are communicated in terms of loss. The fear of losing out is very powerful. Okay, interesting one. Own personal agendas and beliefs often eclipse what we need to do, what's best for the community. Who put that one? Maybe you could expand on that one a little bit, please. Okay, that's all right. We'll keep going round, but we'll just have a look at what we've got. So we make too many assumptions. If they're not doing it, why do we need to? Interesting one. Yeah. Let's. We wait for others to act first. Assess the implications before taking action. Okay, so who's doing this first?
Can I come back on the last one that I just couldn't find the unmute button?
always a common problem, David. Yeah.
Own personal agendas. In terms of climate change and things like that, think about you're sitting in front of that lovely, with the family, all around that wonderful sort of smoky coal fire going mad and all the tar dripping out into your ash box and everything like that. And then somebody mentions, say, greenhouse gases and all the harm and everything. But you say, well, we're cozy here, others will do it, and you expect others to do it. So, because of course it's painful, isn't it? It's painful to actually start to find ways of heating or insulating your home and your cozy environment, because you hope that others are going to do it. And of course, with this sort of the 80-20 rule, there will always be, so you think, well, we're slowing down the process, but others will do it anyway. We'll get there eventually, but we'll be cozy. It's that sort of mindset.
Interesting. Yeah, so when you're all in it together, who's going first? It seems to be coming back to this idea of who's doing it first, who's in charge in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And we've got more comments on that. So if those leading the industry aren't addressing the climate agenda, those following won't do anything. Who are these sustainability consultants that know nothing about design and delivery? Ah, interesting. Okay, so we've got a schism then between a bunch of people maybe saying this is what you need to do and another bunch of people who are actually doing the delivery, and maybe there's a gap. Don't dig enough into the issues with research and data collection. We've got a cost one here. Cost per square foot, measure of cost and income. It's too simple to take account of value. We don't always create things that are fit for purpose. Let's have a look over on this other side before we move on to our final question. So we don't want to be the first to do something new. Not following the status quo attracts risk. Clients want low risk solutions even if they want innovation. Interesting. Project pressures suppress innovation. We're reluctant to admit that things are wrong or don't even believe we have to change course. Okay, we tend to stick with what we know, not investigate a more efficient option. If it's always worked that way, is a common refrain. Right, interesting. So there's a bit of, several times on there, it came up about this idea of leadership, who's in charge, going first, taking ownership of risk, taking ownership. So that leads us on nicely to our final question, really. And for this one, I'm going to put you into breakout rooms for 5 minutes. But the two questions I want you to please think about are, who's in charge? And therefore, how should GIRI respond to the climate crisis? Okay, so this idea of who's in charge, I think we can really sort of try and open the can on that. And therefore, how should GIRI respond? Hello, welcome back, everyone. I know in my room we certainly had a good, interesting discussion. So let's have a look at that first question then. And in the interest of time, we can unmute and shout out if you've got an answer, but please also just type your answer into the chat box. So in terms of this idea of who's in charge, where is the leadership coming from? What did anyone identify in terms of that question? Who is taking a leadership role, or who should be taking a leadership role? Please put it in the chat box, and we'll see what everyone thinks. So, Dave Jones, we all need to lead. Everyone should be in charge. Okay, so Alexi, you've said there has to be regulation. So we've got a few different opinions there. So maybe Alexi, can you explain why you think legislation is important?
Well, hello everyone. We had an interesting conversation in our group about, and actually Debella was talking a lot about if there's no compliance, if you don't have to comply to sustainability standards, then it's not going to happen. It's an economic question. Okay. So if there isn't industry regulation and you don't have to do it, the voluntary, people aren't going to volunteer to invest more in their projects if they don't have to, full stop. Certainly from the developer context, I think that's very true.
Great, thanks. And Debella, it looks like you said something similar. What do you think, Debella?
Yeah, I agree with Alexi. If there's no regulation, there's no incentive to implement, because everything is looked at from a cost and operations perspective.
Okay, really interesting. All right, well, let's go on to that second. So we've got a question there about leadership, and we've identified that we want everyone to be providing leadership, but there seems to be a consensus that there needs to be legislation or something that forces people to comply as well. So it sounds like there's two sides to that. What about that second question? In what's GIRI's role in this? How should GIRI respond in this situation? As an industry body, what is GIRI's role in terms of the climate crisis? So let's have a look. GIRI can make the link between avoiding error and reducing emissions. Okay, so there's, if we avoid error, then that is better than not avoiding error. So that's great. GIRI is a broad base of influencers. Use it. Interesting. Less error improves outcomes for sustainability with less waste. Okay. Oh, sorry, Andrew. I think can you just give me a thumbs up if you can still hear anyone? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I don't know, Andrew. Now, it was I think David in our group. You said something interesting about the Joneses. Do you want to expand on what you were saying there?
Oh, crikey. Well, effectively, people like to keep up with each other. We are a herd. We like to herd in terms of what other people are doing. And a lot of the environmental initiatives or actions that we all take aren't evident. They're not sort of on the side of a bus or a big billboard saying David Belshaw has saved X amount of tons by doing X, Y, and Z. And you're not seeing that on your street. So people don't know, they're not receiving the social signals to take action. They're waiting on others to take the action first. I think that's what I said, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was. It's the fact that we've spoken about individuals. So several people said every individual should be leading. It's up to individuals. And I think your point, David, was yes, but it's useful if other people know what each other are doing, because you can only provide that leadership if other people know you're doing it. If you're doing it in secret, then it's not leadership. And then Gavin, you've related back to key aims. So just wonder if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things we spoke about in our group was making sure we have I think Geary definitely has a voice, but it needs to have a focused voice. We could be slightly too broad in our ambitions and what we're trying to improve. So obviously, clearly, one of the key aims is to reduce error in construction. And, one of the tangible benefits of doing that is to, by default, reduce waste and therefore carbon. So I think that's something which we could do very easily without having to, spend a lot of time deliberating over what we could as a group offer regarding benefits.
Okay, so it's what our core aim is a positive thing. So let's not lose sight of that. Interesting. Okay. Great. Well, I am going to hand back to Cliff because we're at the end. But thank you very much for your contributions. I've really enjoyed it. It's been really great to hear from you. And Cliff, I'll hand back to you to sum up.
Thank you very much, Nick. Interesting as usual. And I think it makes us all think about thinking the round. But Gavin's right. And this came up at the members' meeting as well when we considered that where we are as an initiative. We are focused on error. Error is our business. It's what we have expertise in. It's in that quality equation, and it's what we're offering. But I think it's also true that the environment in which we're living is it's becoming more of an issue all the time. And emphasizing the importance of error avoidance in that respect, I think, is the right thing to do. So thank you very much to Nick for helping us to think about that. And thank you all very much for coming. And hopefully you'll join us for more GIRI forums, or is it 4i? No, it's forums in the future. And they'll be as interesting as this one. Thank you very much, everybody. See you soon. Bye-bye.